Christine.
I can't perform on command like that.
I'm sorry.
Great. So looking at the ADLs is an important part of, and what the CNAs document on a regular basis helps to support what's going on with patients. So we look at the ADLs first, regulatory compliance. The regulations say we attain and maintain highest level of functioning, and in order to get there, we need to know how they're functioning right now. And so what gets documented every day on the CNA flow sheet tells us how much help you're providing them. So the first and foremost reason is to know what their functional level is right now, so we can set them goals to get to that higher level of functioning. The other reason is almost as important, is the payment side. Looking at Medicare, we get paid based on a RUG, they call it Resource Utilization Group. And that RUG category, the resources that we use to take care of the patient determine how much we're going to get paid. So nursing is a resource, therapy is a resource, and then the direct care that we provide the patient every day also counts. So the more help we're providing with the ADLs, the more resources we're using should translate into more reimbursement for our Medicare patients. So when we're looking at the ADLs, there are 4, and you just recently started using a new ADL flow sheet. Collecting a little bit less information than you were asked to collect before, but it's collecting very critical information. So the 4 weight loss ADLs, called weight loss because they're the ones that are last to go. After I can't walk anymore, I can still feed myself usually. So those 4 weight loss ADLs, I call BAT to help me remember them. Bed mobility, eating, transfers, and toileting. Those are the 4 most important for resource utilization, but also those are the ones they look at when they look at monitoring quality to make sure we're not having our patients decline in those areas. And when you document on your flow sheets, you have codes like independent supervision, L for limited, and E for extensive. The important thing about those codes is when you put a 0 in the box, an independent in the box, or an I, you're saying every time that patient did that activity today, he did it completely by himself. No help at all, not once during your whole shift. A T, total, is the exact opposite of that. The only way you can put a T in the box is to say every time the patient did that activity today, the staff had to do it completely for him, and he didn't help me at all, not once the entire time on my shift. So I and T, polar opposites. The S, the supervision, I watched him, I told him what to do, but I didn't touch him. As soon as I touched him, I went beyond supervision. So supervision, eyes and mouth, but no hands-on. Now, the hardest one to differentiate is the limited and the extensive, right? When do I put an L and when do I put an E? And if I asked any number of people, they might all have different answers, but some people will say, I helped her a little, and I had to help her a lot. Therefore, she's limited and she's extensive. But when you're making that determination, it really is based on what? How do you decide that somebody's a limited or an extensive?
How much I can
Say it again.
How much I can do?
How much they can help them. What you really need to look at is, were you providing any weight-bearing assistance at all with that activity? And if you were, then it's extensive. If you weren't, it's limited. And I have my hands like this because the easiest way for me to remember is palms up, palms down. If I'm providing weight-bearing, my palms are usually up when I do that. So thinking about weight-bearing with your palms up, pulling them up in bed, helping them to transfer palms up, it's weight bearing. If my palms are down, guided maneuvering, non-weight bearing. Usually. Doesn't always translate that way, but usually it does. So when you're thinking about transfers, and I always like to demonstrate a transfer activity. So if I could have somebody be my patient, anybody be my patient, and this may be your starring debut.
That's on YouTube.
I give you time.
So you all just saw her. I didn't tell her to go from a standing position to a sitting position and sit in the chair. I didn't watch her, she did it by herself. That transfer would be independent. But I'm gonna show you a transfer with her and have her come over to this chair right here. But I'm gonna help her this time. So what I want you to do is put your hands on your knees and use that to help yourself push up. Good. Now you stand up and go over to that chair over there. How are we gonna code that transfer on our CNA flow sheet?
Wait a minute.
But wait a minute. It looks like I only helped her a little, right? So you're thinking limited? But can you stand up? Where's my hand?
Under my
Under her
arm.
arm.
And it's doing what?
So you're gonna help me pull it up.
It's helping you to pull up weight-bearing support. Even though she went over to that chair and sat down, when I did this, what's the code for weight-bearing?
Extensive.
Have a seat.
That's limited.
My hand's on her. Stand up. But I'm not bearing any of her weight. Sit down. Therapy would call that contact guard. And I can go, I don't treat my patients that way really. I can go from limited to extensive in a second. Watch, stand up. Oh no, you're falling. Weight bearing.
You're supposed to fall, Sharon.
No, you're not supposed to.
No,
fall.
I gotta
fall.
Have a seat.
Come here.
So limited, extensive, very quick change. If I needed to, I would bear weight. But non-weight bearing, palms down. What is it?
Limited.
Limited. As soon as I touch her, limited. Now I might say to her, okay, I want you to stand up. Put your hands there. Okay, good. Now turn the other way. Sorry, I was not clear. Feel the chair behind your knees. Okay, have a seat. Good.
That was still limited.
Supervision. Supervision.
Yeah, I didn't touch her, not once, not at all. But if I wasn't here, she may not have made it to that seat, because I gave her step-by-step direction. Supervision. As soon as I touch her, I've gone beyond supervision. And then it's, I touched her, palms up, palms down, weight bearing, non-weight bearing.
What if they have a gait belt around them and they're holding a gait belt?
That's a good question. Do you guys use gait belts?
Yes, ma'am. And it's been a big push lately for us to start.
Yeah, if I have a gait belt around her waist, and I know you use them because yesterday I asked the question and somebody was ready to give me one, so I know you're using them. That's a good thing. So you have a gait belt on, and it's just around you, and I have my hand like this, and I pull up on the gait belt, weight bearing.
Okay.
If it's around you and I have my hand like this, stand up, please. Non-weight bearing.
Okay.
The thing with the gait belt though is I can go from non-weight bearing to weight bearing very quickly if she starts to slip. But if my hand's touching it, not pulling up on it, and I'm using it to stand, the transfer, have a seat, okay? You're such a good patient.
Yay,
So
Sharon.
volunteer. So transfers, the one thing that I really want to focus on, because that's one thing that I see us miscoding sometimes, bed mobility.
Okay.
Nursing has this really limited definition of bed mobility, turns and reposition self. And all we're thinking about is how the patient turns. Bed mobility is all mobility that happens on the bed. So whatever positioning happens, the pulling up, the going from lying down to sitting up, all part of bed mobility. So if I'm transferring her and I get her out of the wheelchair onto the bed, that's the transfer. The transfer stops when she's sitting on the edge of the bed. Everything else that happens is bed mobility. So how am I going to get those legs onto the bed? I'm going to do this. That's bed mobility, not transfers. We sometimes think because it happens so quickly, transfers from the wheelchair lying down. But the transfer stops when you're on the edge of the bed. And everything else that happens goes under bed mobility. And when I use that example, thinking about bed mobility, getting the legs in the bed, sometimes we're documenting bed mobility is independent because we're thinking turns and she's turning by herself all the time. And we're missing that help that we give her to put her legs in the bed. And you know, if the patient's in therapy and she's getting rehab to get ready to go home, and we're saying she's independent with bed mobility, we might think she's ready to go home. But what's gonna happen when she goes home and that person that was putting her legs on the bed isn't there? Do you have somebody at home that can help you?
No.
Then we're gonna need to give her more therapy to get her ready to go home. But we need to know what the staff is doing for her, so we know how to set those goals to get her to a higher level. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So bed mobility stops when? I mean, transfer stops when?
When you put them on the side of the bed.
When they're on the bed. Everything else that happens is bed mobility. And when you're looking at bed mobility, sometimes I see we miss that. We miss the sitting up and the laying down, and we're just thinking about turning. But they have a lot more mobility going on in the bed than that. I was looking at a chart yesterday, and I'm not going to say whose. The patient weighed 170 some pounds, and bed mobility was coded total assist of one person. That means that that one person is totally lifting this 175-pound patient. He's not helping at all with that bed mobility. And it's either he's helping a little bit because we're not totally lifting him, so he would be extensive, not total, or I had a second person helping me and I forgot to take credit for that second person. So think about every time somebody helps you, pull him up because he slid down, it was total, but it was total of 2, not 1. Because when we're pulling patients up in bed, we're not getting under their shoulders and hoisting them up. We're using the draw sheet and somebody on the other side because we want to prevent the friction sharing pressure ulcers. Any questions about bed mobility? Do you have patients who don't sleep in a bed? They have COPD, they've had it for a long time, they've slept in their recliner at home, and now they come here and that recliner is where they're going to sleep. The bed went out and the recliner came in. Bed mobility is not activity didn't occur for them. The bed is defined as whatever alternate sleep furniture they use. So if that patient slides down and we're pulling him up, that's bed mobility, if that's where he sleeps. So think about that. Bed mobility would never be activity didn't occur, because if I'm in bed, there's mobility going on. It's just, am I being helped or am I doing it myself? Transfers, we talked about a little. Hoyer lift is always total. Patient's not helping with the transfer at all. Usually we have them cross their arms in front of them so they don't get skin tears. Sometimes people will say, well, he's hanging on, he's helping. He's not helping with the transfer. He's hanging on to hurt so his neck doesn't hurt or whatever, but it's not helping with the transfer. So Hoyer lift is always total, usually. There may be exceptions where we're teaching them, I don't know, but just think Hoyer is total. The other lift that you use, the stand-up lift, is not total. With the stand-up lift, the patient has to participate. Otherwise, the stand-up lift isn't going to work. He's hanging on, there's a sling behind him, and it brings him to a standing position. That lift is extensive assist. Now with the Hoyer lift, you always use 2. No matter what, we use 2. Because we have one in front and one pull in from behind to help get to the chair. So the Hoyer lift, when you document a Hoyer transfer on the CNA sheet, what do you write?
Extensive assist times 2.
The Hoyer lift,
Total.
we're going to use T for total,
Total.
and total times 2.
Drink that Mountain Dew,
The
girl.
other left, the other left, which is not the Hoyer lift, the one the patient participates, we might put extensive. And if we have 2 staff, we're going to say extensive times 2.
That's a good thing I ain't filling these papers out. I have them messed up.
What if sometimes you, like on your shift, you used 2 people one time and 1 person the rest of the day?
On your CNA flow sheet, on your documentation, you're going to document the most support that was provided. So if 2 people helped you just once, you're going to document the 2 people. If, you know, and it might be my patient needs me to pivot her out of bed in the morning, and once I do that, she's running it all around chair to chair to chair. I'm going to document the pivot out of bed. I'm not going to document her as independent or supervision, but I'm going to document her based on that. So we did bed mobility and transfers. The other T in my bed is toilet use. Toilet use is a little bit confusing because we're not talking about actually using the toilet. We're talking about elimination here. So you may have patients who don't use the toilet, but they eliminate, and how much help did they need? And here we're looking at incontinent residents, and you might have different levels of needing assist. We're not documenting whether they're incontinent or continent on that sheet, although we may be somewhere. When we're talking about assist, we're talking about how much help they needed. You might have women that have stress incontinence, and they wear Depends or peach pads, and they change them by themselves and they take care of it. Those women would be independent. Then you may have women that are patients that are incontinent, and they don't know they're incontinent, and they don't believe you when you're trying to change them after they've been incontinent, and it takes you and another staff member to provide total care to them. Both incontinent, but different levels of assist. As far as toilet use, a component of the toileting activity is pericare. Anybody that we're actually providing pericare for after an incontinent episode or after toilet use, we're going to code as extensive assist because we're doing one component of that activity for them. So anybody that we're actually providing the care for would be at least extensive assist. Now, when we're documenting catheters, urinals, bedpans, the emptying is not part of the activity. Some people will say, well, I had to empty the urinal, therefore he's extensive. Take the emptying of it out of the picture and then figure out how much help he needs. And let me give you an example. You have guys in your nursing home that use urinals. You come back periodically throughout the shift and empty them, and that's all you do. They are independent with the toileting. And it may be set up because you put the urinal where they could reach it, but they're independent with setup help. And then you have guys that are confused. And you have to stay with them while they use the urinal because they might pour it in the flower vase or in the water pitcher. So you stay and give direction. Those guys are supervision. And then you have some guys that you might have to, whoops, I have a balance deficit, just to let you know. You have some guys that you might have to guide their leg out of the way so they can find the body part that goes in the urinal. Guided maneuvering, non-weight bearing is, yeah, you didn't know as my patient you were going to have to answer questions too, or you never would have known here, right? So that's limited. You may have patients that you have to pick the body part up and put it in the urinal for them. When my palm's not up when I pick the body part up and put it in the urinal, but I'm bearing weight of that part of their body, so it's going to be weight-bearing assist, even though my palm's not up. So what weight-bearing assist is extensive, but they're all using the urinal, just different levels of assistance. Patients with a catheter. Patients with a catheter. What do you do for a patient with a catheter?
Give cath care.
Yes, you empty it, but you also give cath care. You're washing around the tubing, doing that. They're not participating at all, are they?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you code them?
Total.
But if they have a bowel movement on your shift, then you have to take that into consideration. So they're total for catheter care. If they're also total for their bowel movement, then you would code total. If they participate when they have the bowel movement, then they're extensive. What else? Transferring on and off of the toilet is part of the toileting activity. So if I transfer you to the toilet, that's going to be included in the activity of toileting. If I have to have another staff member help me to transfer you to the toilet because I can't manage your clothes while I'm transferring you, then it's going to be extensive of 2. And the next activity, eating. Are you hungry?
No.
Eating, when we look at eating, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples, okay? You have residents that you bring the tray to. You set the tray in front of them, you leave and you come back and get it. How do you document that on the flow sheet?
If they feed themselves.
Yep, you bring them the tray, you take the lid, you come back later, pick it up, and you document how much they ate.
Independent.
Independent. Now let's say I bring them the tray and now I put salt and pepper on their food because they have tremors, and if I don't do it for them, it's going to go all in one place. I put cream and sugar in their coffee, butter on their bread, and then I leave. Come back and get their tray when they're done eating.
Limited assist.
It says they found one.
Did I touch her?
Oh.
No.
What did I do when I did all of that for her?
I set up her trash.
I set her up. And I didn't feed her at all. So that's going to be independent with setup.
What's that up?